The rain battered against the weathered windows of the small cabin as Beatrice Clarke huddled in the corner, her ears straining to hear the heated conversation between her mother and the stranger who had arrived just after dusk. At 19, Beatrice had grown accustomed to her mother's schemes, but tonight felt different, more final. $50 is fair. Her mother's sharp voice cut through the storm. She's strong, can cook, clean, and won't give you no trouble. Seems mighty steep for a house girl, the man's voice drawled, thick with liquor. 35 is my offer. Take it or leave it. Beatrice's stomach turned. The small Colorado mining town of Silver Creek had never offered much hope, not since her father had died in the mine collapse 3 years prior. Since then, her mother had spiraled, the whiskey bottle becoming her closest companion, but to sell her own daughter like cattle. Beatrice's hands trembled as she gathered what few belongings she could claim as her own. Done, her mother declared, the clink of coins following. Take her tonight. I don't want no tearful goodbyes. The year was 1878, and Beatrice knew women had few rights and fewer options. She'd heard stories of desperate mothers in these parts selling daughters to brothels, or as wives to men 3 times their age. The stranger's heavy footsteps approached, and Beatrice pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. The door swung open, revealing a portly man with a greasy beard and breath that reeked of cheap whiskey. "Come on, girl, you're mine now." "I won't go," Beatrice said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I'm not property to be sold." The man laughed, an ugly sound that sent chills down her spine. "Your mother took my money fair and square. Now you either come willing or I'll drag you." Outside, the storm intensified, rain hammering the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. As the man lunged for her, Beatrice ducked under his arm and bolted for the front door. Her mother stood by the table, counting coins, not even looking up as her daughter fled into the torrential downpour. The cold rain soaked Beatrice instantly, plastering her faded blue dress to her skin. She ran blindly down the muddy road, the stranger's curses fading behind her. Silver Creek was small, offering few places to hide. The church would be locked, the saloon too dangerous for a woman alone, and most of the townspeople wouldn't risk crossing the man her mother had made a deal with. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the rain, and Beatrice ducked behind a water trough, certain it was her pursuer. Through the curtain of rain, she saw a tall figure on horseback, moving steadily down the main street. The rider wore a dark slicker, the brim of his hat pulled low against the downpour. As the stranger approached, Beatrice made a desperate decision. Better to throw herself on the mercy of an unknown traveler than be claimed by the man her mother had sold her to. She stepped out into the road, raising a hand to halt the rider. The horse snorted, steam rising from its nostrils in the cool air as the rider reined it to a stop. For a long moment, they regarded each other through the rain. Beatrice, soaked and desperate, and the stranger, his features shadowed beneath his hat. "Please," Beatrice called over the storm. "I need help." The rider dismounted in one fluid motion, revealing himself to be a tall man with broad shoulders. As he stepped closer, Beatrice could make out a strong jawline and eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. "What's a woman doing out in this weather?" His voice was deep but gentle, tinged with concern rather than judgment. "Running," she answered honestly. "My mother just sold me to a man from the saloon. He'll be looking for me." The stranger's expression hardened. "Sold you?" Before Beatrice could explain further, shouts echoed down the street. The portly man from the cabin had gathered reinforcements. 2 rough-looking men now accompanied him, lanterns bobbing in the darkness. "There she is," her would-be owner bellowed. "Grab her." The rider's reaction was instant. He removed his slicker with one hand, wrapping it around Beatrice's shoulders, then lifted her effortlessly onto his horse. "Hold tight," he instructed, swinging up behind her. With a click of his tongue and a nudge of his heels, the horse bolted forward, carrying them away from the pursuing men and into the midnight storm. Beatrice clung to the saddle horn, the stranger's arm firm around her waist as they galloped out of Silver Creek. The rain beat against them mercilessly, but the warmth of the man at her back kept the worst of the chill at bay. They rode for what seemed like hours, the horse navigating the treacherous terrain with remarkable sure-footedness. Finally, lights appeared through the trees, a small ranch house set back from the main road, windows glowing with welcoming warmth. The rider slowed the horse to a walk as they approached. "My place," he explained. "You'll be safe here tonight." Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a fire crackling in the stone hearth. The stranger introduced himself as Kieran Guthrie, a rancher who owned a modest spread just outside Silver Creek's boundaries. "I was in town to sell some horses," he explained as he stoked the fire. "Didn't expect to be riding home with company." Beatrice stood awkwardly by the door, dripping onto the wooden floor. "I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Guthrie. You saved me from a fate worse than death." His eyes met hers, serious and intense. "No man has the right to buy or sell another person, Miss Clarke. Beatrice Clarke. Miss Clarke," he nodded. "You're welcome to stay here tonight. Tomorrow we can figure out what's best for you." Kieran provided her with a clean shirt and trousers that had belonged to his younger sister before she married and moved to Denver. Though comically large on Beatrice's frame, the dry clothes were a blessing. He made coffee while she changed behind a privacy screen, then offered her a bowl of stew he reheated from his supper. As Beatrice ate, she shared her story: her father's death, her mother's descent into alcoholism, and the increasingly desperate situations that had culminated in tonight's attempted sale. "I've nowhere to go," she admitted. "No family, no money, no prospects." Kieran listened thoughtfully. "I need help around the ranch," he said finally. "My sister used to handle the household, but since she left, things have fallen into disarray. I can offer you honest work, room and board, and my word as a gentleman that you'll be treated with respect." The offer seemed too good to be true, but as Beatrice studied Kieran's face in the firelight, she saw nothing but sincerity. At 26, Kieran had the weathered look of a man who'd lived honestly but not easily. His hands were calloused from work, his manner straightforward. "I accept," Beatrice said simply. "Though I warn you, my cooking skills are modest at best." For the first time, Kieran smiled, a transformation that softened his rugged features. "Can't be worse than mine." That night, Beatrice slept on a cot in the main room while Kieran took his bedroom. Despite the circumstances, it was the most peaceful sleep she'd had in years. Dawn brought clear skies and a new reality. Beatrice woke to find Kieran already outside, tending to the animals. The ranch was larger than she'd realized in the darkness, a modest but well-maintained operation with a small herd of cattle, several horses, chickens, and a vegetable garden that had seen better days. Over the next few weeks, Beatrice threw herself into her new role. She cleaned the long, neglected cabin, mended Kieran's clothes, and improved her cooking skills through determined trial and error. Kieran, for his part, was a patient employer, never raising his voice even when she burned the biscuits or oversalted the beans. They settled into a comfortable routine, Kieran working the land while Beatrice managed the household. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, Kieran reading aloud from one of his precious books while Beatrice sewed or mended. These quiet moments became the highlight of her days. One morning, about a month after her arrival, Beatrice was hanging laundry when she spotted riders approaching. 3 men, one of whom she recognized with a jolt of fear as the man her mother had sold her to. She dropped the wet shirt she'd been hanging and ran to the fields where Kieran was mending a fence. "They've come for me," she gasped, pointing toward the approaching riders. Kieran straightened, his expression hardening as he recognized the visitors. "Stay behind me," he instructed, guiding Beatrice toward the house. The men reined in their horses in the yard. The portly man, Frank Milner, as Beatrice had learned his name, was smirking triumphantly. "Thought you could steal what I paid for, Guthrie," Milner called, dismounting heavily. "That girl belongs to me. I gave her mother good money." Kieran stood tall, one hand resting casually on his holstered revolver. "Miss Clarke is employed here of her own free will. She's not for sale." Milner spat in the dirt. "Possession is 9/10 of the law, and I've got a receipt saying I own her services fair and square." "No paper gives you ownership of a human being," Kieran replied evenly. "Not in this territory, not anywhere." The tension crackled between them. Beatrice knew Kieran was handy with his revolver. She'd seen him dispatch predators threatening the livestock with impressive accuracy. But he was outnumbered 3-1. "I'm not going with you." Beatrice stepped forward, finding courage in Kieran's steady presence. "I'm a free woman making my own choices." Milner laughed. "Listen to the little bird chirping. Your mother took my $35. That makes you mine." "I'll pay you 50, Kieran said suddenly, "to tear up whatever paper you have and never bother Miss Clarke again." The offer caught everyone by surprise. $50 was a significant sum more than a month's wages for most working men. Milner hesitated, clearly calculating. 75. 50, Kieran repeated firmly. "And you leave my property now without any trouble." After a tense moment, Milner nodded grudgingly. Kieran went into the house, returning moments later with the money. The exchange was made, and Milner tore up the crude bill of sale he pulled from his pocket. As the men rode away, Beatrice turned to Kieran, tears in her eyes. "I can't believe you did that. I'll work to repay every cent, I promise." Kieran's expression was unreadable. "You don't owe me anything, Miss Clarke. No person should be bought or sold. I just made things right." That evening, their usual comfortable silence felt strained. Beatrice could sense Kieran watching her when he thought she wasn't looking, his gaze thoughtful. "You have family elsewhere?" he asked suddenly. "Someone who might take you in now that you're truly free to choose your path?" The question stung unexpectedly. Did he want her to leave? "No," she answered honestly. "There's no one." Kieran nodded, returning to his book, but Beatrice could tell he wasn't really rating. Something had shifted between them, and she wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. The next morning, Kieran announced he needed to ride into town for supplies. "Would you care to join me?" he asked, his manner more formal than usual. "You might want to purchase some things for yourself." Beatrice hesitated. She hadn't returned to Silver Creek since the night she fled, and the prospect was daunting. But she nodded, sensing this was important to Kieran. They rode double on his stallion, Tempest, Beatrice seated behind Kieran. Though she'd grown accustomed to his presence over the past month, being pressed against his back with her arms around his waist felt different today, more intimate somehow. Silver Creek looked smaller in the daylight, less threatening. A few people nodded to Kieran as they passed, eyeing Beatrice curiously. She kept her head high, refusing to be shamed by whispers. Their first stop was the general store, where Kieran immediately approached the proprietor. "Miss Clarke needs proper attire," he stated. "Whatever she selects, put it on my account." Before Beatrice could protest, he excused himself, saying he had other business to attend to. Left with the storekeeper's wife, Mrs. Holloway, Beatrice found herself guided toward ready-made dresses and fabric bolts. "Mr. Guthrie's a good man," Mrs. Holloway commented as she helped Beatrice select a serviceable blue dress and material for another. Keeps to himself mostly, but fair in all his dealings. He's been very kind to me, Beatrice agreed, wondering what else the woman knew of her situation. Mrs. Holloway smiled knowingly. He's never brought a woman to town before, not once in the 5 years he's had that ranch. Beatrice felt her cheeks warm. I'm his housekeeper, she clarified. Nothing more. Of course, dear, Mrs. Holloway replied, in a tone that suggested she believed otherwise. When Kieran returned an hour later, Beatrice had selected 2 ready-made dresses, fabric and notions for 2 more, sturdy boots, and various personal items she'd been too embarrassed to ask him for directly. Their next stop was the small restaurant on the corner, where Kieran insisted on treating her to a proper meal. As they ate, Beatrice noticed several people watching them with undisguised interest. People are staring, she whispered. Kieran glanced around, unconcerned. Small towns run on gossip. They're just curious. About the woman you bought, Beatrice said bitterly. Kieran's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Is that what you think? That I bought you from Milner, didn't you? The question had been troubling her since yesterday. No, he said firmly. I paid him to relinquish an immoral claim. There's a difference. You're not obligated to me in any way, Beatrice. If you wanted to leave tomorrow, I'd wish you well and help you on your way. The use of her given name, so rare from his lips, startled her almost as much as his words. Do you want me to leave? She asked quietly. Kieran's eyes met hers, something vulnerable flickering in their depths. No, he said simply. I don't. On their ride home, something had changed between them. Beatrice's arms wrapped more comfortably around Kieran's waist, and his hand occasionally covered hers, a gesture of reassurance or perhaps something more. As spring turned to summer, their relationship evolved with the seasons. Kieran began teaching Beatrice to ride, gifting her a gentle mare he'd been training. Together they worked the garden, Kieran's knowledge of crops complementing Beatrice's growing skill in preserving the harvest. In the evenings, their fireside talks grew deeper. Kieran shared stories of growing up in Kentucky, coming west after the war, building his ranch from nothing. Beatrice spoke of her childhood dreams, her father's kindness, the hopes she'd nearly abandoned. Neither spoke directly of feelings developing between them, though the signs were there: lingering glances, brief touches, the way Kieran's voice softened when he spoke her name. One evening in late July, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Kieran turned to Beatrice with unusual seriousness. I've been thinking, he began, his voice hesitant. Your position here, it's caused talk in town. Beatrice's heart sank. The gossip had been inevitable, she supposed. An unmarried woman living with an unmarried man, regardless of the circumstances, was bound to raise eyebrows. I understand, she said softly. If you think I should find other arrangements, no, Kieran interrupted, taking her hand in his. That's not what I'm saying at all. He took a deep breath. Beatrice, these months with you have been the happiest of my life. I never expected to find someone who would make this place feel like a true home. Her pulse quickened as he continued, his calloused thumb tracing circles on her palm. I'm not a man of fancy words, but I care for you deeply. More than care, I love you. I think I have since that rainy night when you stood in the road, soaked to the bone but so brave. He met her gaze directly. I'd be honored if you'd consider becoming my wife. Tears filled Beatrice's eyes. You don't need to marry me out of duty or to silence gossips, she whispered. Kieran shook his head firmly. This has nothing to do with duty. I love you, Beatrice Clarke, plain and simple. Joy bloomed in her chest, a feeling so foreign and wonderful she could hardly contain it. "I love you too," she admitted. "I've been afraid to hope, to believe that someone like you could want someone like me." "Someone like me," he smiled. "A stubborn rancher with more cattle than conversational skills," Beatrice laughed through her tears. "A good, honorable man who treats everyone with respect and kindness." Kieran leaned forward, hesitating just briefly before pressing his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that felt like coming home. When they parted, both were smiling. "Is that a yes?" he asked. "Yes," Beatrice replied. "1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later by the circuit preacher who visited Silver Creek monthly. The ceremony was small, just the two of them, the preacher, and a handful of neighbors Kieran had befriended over the years. Beatrice wore one of her new dresses, adorned with wildflowers Kieran had gathered that morning. Their wedding night was a sweet discovery of each other, Kieran's gentleness putting Beatrice's nervousness at ease. In his arms, she found a passion she'd never imagined and a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes. As they lay together afterward, Beatrice traced the scar on Kieran's shoulder, a remnant from his brief service in the war. "I never thought I'd find happiness again after my father died," she confessed. "Especially not that night in the rain." Kieran kissed her forehead. "Sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings." Life as Mrs. Kieran Guthrie suited Beatrice. Together, they worked to expand the ranch, adding more cattle and improving the house. Kieran taught her to shoot, insisting she know how to protect herself when he was away. Beatrice, in turn, filled their home with touches that made the cabin truly theirs: curtains at the windows, quilts on the beds, flowers on the table whenever they were in season. In town, attitudes shifted. What had been suspicious glances became friendly greetings. Mrs. Holloway from the general store became a particular friend, often saving special fabrics or hard-to-find items for Beatrice. A year into their marriage, Beatrice received word that her mother had died, found frozen outside the saloon after a winter storm. Despite everything, she mourned the woman her mother had been before grief and alcohol consumed her. "You want to visit her grave?" Kieran asked gently. Beatrice considered the question carefully. "No," she decided finally. "I've made my peace. The past is past." That spring, Beatrice discovered she was expecting their first child. Kieran's joy was boundless. He built a cradle with his own hands, expanded their bedroom, and fretted over Beatrice's every movement, despite her assurances that pregnancy wasn't an illness. On a crisp October morning, after a difficult but ultimately successful labor, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy son they named James, after Kieran's father. Holding her child in her arms, with Kieran beaming beside her, Beatrice felt a circle of love complete itself. "He's perfect," Kieran whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's downy head. "He looks like you," Beatrice observed, noting the strong jaw already evident in their son's tiny face. "Poor child," Kieran joked, but his eyes were suspiciously bright. As James grew, so did the ranch. Kieran's careful management and breeding program resulted in cattle sought after throughout the territory. They hired 2 hands to help with the increasing workload, building a bunkhouse for them near the barn. When James was 3, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor. Unlike her brother's easy birth, Eleanor's arrival was fraught with complications. For 2 terrifying days, Kieran paced outside their bedroom as the doctor and midwife fought to save both mother and child. "I can't lose you," Kieran told Beatrice when he was finally allowed to see her, his face haggard from worry. "You and the children are everything to me." Beatrice recovered slowly but completely, treasuring her family all the more for nearly losing them. As Eleanor grew from infant to toddler, Her bright spirit and curiosity reminded Beatrice of herself as a child, before hardship had dimmed her light. 5 years into their marriage, Beatrice and Kieran faced their greatest challenge when a devastating drought struck the region. Water sources dried up, grass withered, and cattle grew thin. Many neighboring ranches failed, their owners packing up for Oregon or California. "We could sell," Kieran suggested one night after calculating their dwindling reserves. "Take what we can get and start fresh somewhere with more rainfall." Beatrice looked around the home they'd built together, the children's drawings pinned to the walls, the kitchen garden she'd nurtured, the memories contained within every board and beam. "No," she said firmly. "This is our home. We'll find a way." Together, they worked tirelessly. Kieran rowed far afield, finding water sources others had overlooked. Beatrice rationed supplies with military precision. They sold off half their herd to preserve water for the best breeding stock, using the proceeds to dig a deeper well. Their perseverance paid off. When the rains finally returned, the Guthrie Ranch was one of the few that had survived intact. As other ranchers drifted back to reclaim abandoned properties, they sought out Kieran's advice and often his cattle to rebuild their herds. By the time James was 10 and Alina 7, the Guthrie Ranch had become one of the most prosperous in the county. They added a proper second story to the house, giving the children their own rooms and adding a dedicated study where Kieran kept the ranch accounts. On the 10th anniversary of the night they met, Kieran surprised Beatrice with a special gift, a silver locket containing miniature portraits of their children. "To remind you of the family we built together," he said, as he fastened it around her neck. "From that rainy night to forever." Beatrice touched the locket, remembering the desperate young woman she'd been and marveling at the journey that had brought her here. "I was so frightened that night," she recalled, "running from one fate into complete uncertainty. And I was just a lonely rancher, riding through the rain," Kieran smiled, pulling her close, "never imagining I was riding toward everything I'd ever need." As they stood together on their porch, watching their children play in the yard with the ranch dogs, Beatrice felt a profound gratitude. The midnight storm that had seemed like the end of her world had instead been the beginning of a life more beautiful than she could have imagined. "I love you, Kieran Guthrie," she said, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for claiming me that night." Kieran kissed her tenderly. "It was you who claimed me, Beatrice, heart and soul." And as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in the same gold and crimson shades of that evening when Kieran had first proposed, Beatrice knew with absolute certainty that some storms were worth weathering, for they could lead to the clearest, most beautiful days of all.